example of this is lots of money. There are the amount of money you can make if you're sufficiently clever and sufficiently ruthless. You could go on and on and on and on. But there are very strict to the amount of beef you can eat at one meal, to the amount of girls you can give, to whom you could give adequate satisfaction, to the number of houses you could live in, to the amount of clothes you could wear. You can have, supposing you wore 3 suits a day, and you wanted to be different all the time, or there were 365 days of the year, multiply that by 3, and that's enough for anyone who dressed as also. That there is a real limit. And you would consider, if you were wearing, you might find a favorite suit, one that you felt suited you. What we also join with that, the word physical and material. The real world is not necessarily physical or material. These are purely conceptual. You see, when somebody's not material, when somebody's not material, material is an idea, is a concept. And to say the real enlightened people. Yeah. There is a happy land on the river. Say yes, you believe that our explanation doctrine of the you believe that our explanation doctrine of the Trinity is very correct, but there are certain subtle respects in which you have to.
I have made it clear to the Israelis that I do not support their expansionist ideas. The indigenous people that land have rights that cannot be ignored. We must find a fair solution, not one dictated.
Not now. So what's happened? Bologna has moved to the suburbs. Everybody moves to the suburbs is diluted among the various municipalities. People say to me, how can we save St. Adalbert? I say, move back into the city. Well, there you are. You know, you can't move Polish Jewish synagogues. The majority of Jews in Chicago were Polish Jews. It's a diaspora that's had a tremendous impact on the city.
I killed that first deer with a shotgun 22 rifle, no sights on it. 15-year-old put hooky shoot. Boy, it was going round. Me trying to, it wasn't dead. I finally got it to the leg, and I was trying to get a shell with my gun. It was taking me everywhere. And I finally got one in there and pulled out. And finally got it down there to his ear. I got it. Killed that cook.
Chicago looking for a better way of life. About all that they brought with them were their hopes and their dreams. Bill Staples and his wife Gloria came from Alabama.
Well, I mean, every man got it made good, you know. Make it better for my family, for my kids. These are the prime reasons I came up on.
Well, when I came to Chicago, I just thought I was, just something I had never seen before. I just thought everything was going to be like heaven, I guess, when I got here. But when I got here, I found out that it was.
I found a better job, but I can't say that I found better living conditions. Because the living conditions were not as good as they were.
They found highways and segregated slums, and in general they found that the poor paid more.
When you knew a town like Chicago, the first thing, they easily got the worst ones. I mean, in other words, if you went in and bought this gas, but I'll take a chance on it. Okay, you buy this, I'll pay $60. This is a fact. And this man, once by his suit for he missed one payment, they have what's known here as a wage assignment.
They found that the market for unskilled labor was shrinking. They found that in the North, too, the color of a man's skin could determine whether he got a job or a card.
It's been long ever since I've been here. Because I would like to have somebody, even if it was a distant, relative.
Garnishing wages for 100 years.
Talk to everyone.
Millions of people, as we said, millions of people, refugees, kill women and children, casualties every year. Thousands of children are killed because of our efforts. Do we have that right? There are needs because we want to protect ourselves, so we don't. It's not a greater problem. This is also our war. those of us who stay here in the United States, we must feel it. We use napalm when a village is destroyed, civilians are killed. This is also us. And they
beloved by everyone here.
You might build that up. And they're all fantastically prosperous. See, once you've got a dollar street, do that. So let's take that. You're a guru, and you set up in Sausalito or it's the economics of plenty. And it's all based if real do you don't want to tie them up. Because if you do that, you set them all free, you really get the point. And then they're grateful and they send their friends to you. The craft of you see, I just want to be very frank with you because after all, we pay to come to these seminars. In the United States, we immoral not to ask them. Because in the United States, people disrespect anything they get. You have to wait a long time. You have to be persistent in token of your sincerity. But in this country, the hang-up is money.
Almost said what?
So naturally, one asks if you make an awful lot of it by being a successful guru, you give the rest away. Meditation, we are not trying anything. You are under the fundamental force. We go to concerts to improve our culture, to the theater, to the movie, in order to be able to say we have become improved. If you go to the concert to become more cultured, you are not really listening. So meditation, above all things, because it's got a slightly disciplinary flavor to it, a slightly religious flavor to it, is something that people use somehow an expert and what a great ordeal it was and how good it was for them and how you who haven't gone through this discipline are a kind of underling. See, I've had this put on years because and they say, well, you're just a dilettante. See, you have not as we have. And you really ought to something. You ought to put up a long endurance test. Now, the reason why in meditation one sits in a certain way, whether you sit like I'm sitting now, or whether you sit in the lotus posture, your legs become a little uncomfortable. And the reason for that is not self-punitive, it's really that it helps you to stay awake. In a sensory deprivation chamber, you would very likely to sleep. But the art in meditation is to be wide awake. Without, however, the intellectual chatter going on in the head. Even longer. And to be wide awake. And it's you take it indirectly. Without having in your head the concept. And this becomes, of course, a very pleasant thing to do. So that meditation becomes not something that you put in so much time at, like you might put in time in a jail, but becomes a pleasure. Of course, from the point of view of our religion in the United States, that's almost sinful. Religion is, from the point of view of our religion in the United States, that's almost sinful. Religion is, there's enough inevitable suffering going on anyhow. You're going to die one of these days. Everybody encounters difficulties in their lives. You don't need to go out of your way to seek the fundamental approaches to meditation. One, you see this morning, Charlotte was getting us to bounce on our heels and to stretch as tightly as we could to overcome gravity. And then after that, she said, see what happens when you don't do it. So one of the methods of meditation is to stretch as tightly as possible, to concentrate with your whole energy on a point, and to use the, you say in yoga there's an exercise called kumbha, which is a way of breathing, which is it's a kind of force, holding the breath as long and as tightly as you can. That was like the stretching. That's like those people who, say, in the Tendai temple up on Mount Hiei over Kyoto, who practice bowing. Thousands and thousands of bowings. They stand up, they kneel down, prostrate themselves on the floor, get up again, stand up, kneel down, prostrate them on the floor. And there are those Tibetan monks who do the Lungokpa, running through the mountain trails with enormous leaps. And they do like Nijinsky could do this a little bit in the air and seem to overcome gravity and then drop again. And they go on and on and on, bouncing along the road. Or there are other pilgrims who prostrate themselves at every step, traveling a long journey. There are people who run the streets of Kyoto, 100 miles through the streets of Kyoto every day at a jog trot. There are all kinds of things like that where you work yourself to a limit and struggle. Because in doing that, you get a thing which runners call second wind. And second wind in running is where you are no longer running, but it runs you. Where, in other words, the ego energy in the running is displaced and the energy of the whole organism takes over. And that is all the energy of the whole universe. When you get second wind. So you get second wind in this fierce kind of meditation. Alternatively, there's another way in. And in this way is a kind of so-called easy way. And one uses it for a different type of personality. There are certain people who must have the difficult way because they don't know they exist unless they're sitting on a spike. And those kind of people who don't believe they're real unless they hurt have to follow the difficult way. But there is a subtle way, which is the Taoistic approach, wherein instead of trying to master and dominate your body-mind, you let go. And you let it do whatever it wants to do. Let's suppose, for the sake of example, for a moment, you just close your eyes and allow your eardrums to respond to any sound going on. There are no proper sounds or improper sounds. You may feel free to shift, shuffle, cough, sneeze as you will. Don't try to identify, locate, or name the sounds that you hear. Just let the rippling air play with your eardrum. As you hear the sound of my voice coming across to you, listen to what I have to say simply as tones. Your brain will take care of understanding. You don't try to understand. In other words, allow your ears to hear anything they want to hear. And to assist you in this, keep your tongues relaxed in the lower jaw. Listening to every sound in the whole field of air vibrations, as you would listen to music, as you would listen to Bach or Ravi Shankar, without trying to see any meaning. There is no hurry. This is what there is. Well, now, of course, one can do that through all the senses, not just the ears, but the body feeling, skin contact, do it with the eyes. Because our culture, as Marshall McLuhan has pointed out, is excessively visual. And because of the Gutenberg galaxy, because of making sense out of print and the enormous valuation placed on literacy, we've overbalanced one sense, which is the visual sense. When we say to somebody, you smell, that's uncomplimentary. We should say, of course, correctly, you stink. If we mean you have a bad smell. But everything connected with smell is repressed. And therefore, because we still continue to smell, it is an unconscious sense through which we relate to each other in ways that we don't know. You take an instinctive liking to someone because you like the smell, but you don't know that. You take an instinctive dislike to someone because you don't like the smell, but you don't know that. All sorts of things, all sorts of messages are passed through the nose, but we're not aware of them. We don't have an adequate vocabulary of smell. Only 3 adjectives in English are associated with smell uniquely: acrid, pungent, fragrant. All the others are associated with borrowed from other senses. Think how many adjectives we have for vision, for sound, for taste. Although taste, of course, is inseparable from smell. So, the second way of meditation, which I was demonstrating to you, allowing your ears to hear whatever they want to hear. In the same way, you allow your breath to breathe any way it wants to breathe. You allow your muscle skin tone of feeling, the sense of touch, to feel any way it wants to feel. You allow your eyes to see anything they want to see. And finally, you allow your mind to think anything it wants to think. Let it go. This is the relaxed way. The other way is the tense way. They come to the same conclusion. You go around this way, take the right-hand path and go there, take the left-hand path and go there. I'm not going to evaluate between one and the other. It's up to the individual. But the way Charlotte and I have been interested in for a long time is the way which is natural, which doesn't force things, and which lets the organism, with its own inner sense of what is correct, do it by itself. So, if you will let your mind, alone, you don't try to concentrate it, you don't try to discipline it, you merely let it do whatever it wants to do. Whatever thoughts want to flow through your head, let them flow. Don't try either to get with them and make something of it, and don't try to stop them. Just let them go. Besides, who are you? As distinct from your thoughts, as distinct from your visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory sensations. Who might intervene and say, you do otherwise? Because when we get that terrific split between our experience, our feelings, our sensations, on the one hand, and on the other, something called the experiencer, the control agent who has and who directs all these things, there's the root of our trouble. Because we are confusing ourselves with an image of ourselves. And under those circumstances, we define the living organism as a material object. The body, which corrupts, and which is somehow antithetical to spirit. Not realizing that the idea of the body as something antithetical to spirit is purely a conception. This is not a conception. And as we see it now from the standpoint of 20th century quantum physics, it's a shimmering phenomenon of electrical energy. It's a light show. This isn't what we used to think of as physical at all. Block, chunky stuff. It's a zizzing dance. It's like fire. That's the meaning of the Buddhist figure Fudo. This guy with a sword in one hand and a rope in the other, with a fierce face and flames all around. Fudo means immovable. this morning. A flame. It seems to be a flame. A flame. Thing that sticks. One position. So Fudo was claiming about the sword, which cuts off all entanglements, and the rope. And not the rope spot. Maybe just a wiggle. He cuts loose our conceptions so that we can see this all too solid flesh dissolve. Now, if everybody's comfortable, we can get started. I've announced that this seminar is to be about the cosmic network. And therefore, we've got to spend the first evening understanding something about the nature of networks. Because in order to get the principle of a network across, I have to convey to you an idea which is extremely simple, but which is difficult to grasp only because we're not used to it. We are used to thinking as Westerners, as having a certain kind of language, and therefore a certain kind of logic that goes with it. We're used to thinking of the world in terms of the game of billiards. In other words, we are still thinking about our psychology, our bodies, and their relationship to the outside world in terms of what would scientifically be called Newtonian mechanics. And Newtonian mechanics has a very long history because it goes back to some of the atomic theories of people like Democritus, who were among the great pre-Socratic philosophers of ancient Greece. And so we may as well begin with a little bit about the history of the idea of an atom, because this has always fascinated people. What is the world fundamentally? What is all this? Well, one way of finding out is to take a knife and chop something in two, so you can see what's inside it. What is an apple inside? What is a seed inside? What is a human body inside? And then you'll find that when you chop the thing in two, you've got two pieces, but the cutting reveals that it has a structure inside. And this structure is composed of what we call organs or parts. And then in turn, in order to inquire into them, we take them and we chop them apart. And in our curiosity to find out how it's made, in just the same way that a child will take a toy to pieces, we chop and chop and chop until we've got bits so small that they're the same width as the edge of the knife. And they can't be cut anymore unless we can find a finer knife. And so when we get down to that bit beyond which there is no bitter, it is called in Greek atomos, which means the first letter A means non-tomos, cuttable. And so the word atom means that smallest particle of the world which can't be cut into any smaller particle. That's the original idea of atomism. So then it went further than that to the notion that the world was built in the same sort of way that a house could be built of bricks or stones. The world is seen, therefore, as a composite of fundamental particles. Then what remained to be discovered was the laws governing the relationship between these particles. And so naturally one thought of them as little balls. Why balls? Because balls are hard to cut. If you take a ball bearing and hit at it with a sword, it's liable to jump right off to one side. A cube will submit to being cut with a ball. It's very difficult to get at. Very strong formation. So people have always tended to consider atoms as balls, especially atoms of liquid. There was a notion, you see, that the atoms of the element of earth were cubes, because cubes all sit together rather firmly. Liquid, which when you put up good brew, that was balls. Fire was made of, if I remember rightly, pyramids. Air, I can't remember what air was made of. I know what their atoms were shaped like. Maybe sausages or something like that, because air is pretty difficult to get at too. But they had some ideas. But fundamentally, what has influenced Western thought and still influences Western thought is the idea of an atom as some sort of fundamental little planetary system. And so these things come into relationship with each other and they bang each other around, as in the game of billiards. so if we are to understand the world profoundly, we have to find out what are the laws governing the relationship of the atoms. Now, you must understand, first of all, a principle about what are called laws of nature. We inherit the idea of laws of nature from our theology. And our theology that we've grown up with is in certain ways peculiarly different from the theologies of Oriental peoples. Jewish theology and Christian theology, which have entered very profoundly into the common sense of the average person, have an image of the world which is quite basically political, and we'll go further than that and say it's monarchical. It's based on the idea that the world is a construct evoked out of nothingness by the commandment of a celestial king. Now, there may be Jews in this room who are practicing and devout Jews, and there may be Christians in this room who are practicing and devout Christians. And I don't want to offend you by any imagery that I choose or remarks that I may make about this imagery, because I don't suppose that anybody has come to this room, to this particular place, who is either a practicing or Christian Jew, who has what I would call a naive idea of God. But the funny thing is about our ideas of God is that our symbols, the images, the mythological forms which we use to describe God, have an extremely powerful influence on our feelings and on the way we behave. After all, I was a member of the Church of England when I was a small boy, and that had a very powerful effect on me. And in the Church of England, it's quite obvious, from an emotional point of view, as distinct from a very intellectual point of view, that God stands behind the King of England. And the King of England and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the whole hierarchy of lords and ladies and noblemen and officials who descend from this point are somehow involved, at any rate this is perfectly clear to a small boy, are somehow involved with the hierarchy of heaven. Because at morning prayer, to which we met every Sunday, the minister would pray a prayer which began, "O Almighty Father, high and mighty, King of kings, Lord of lords, the only ruler of princes, who dost from thy throne behold all the dwellers upon earth. Most heartily we beseech thee with thy favour to behold our most gracious sovereign Lord, King George," etc. And so this was a very courtly procedure at which the clergyman, dressed in his proper robes, proceeded to the altar, which is a kind of earthly symbol of the throne of heaven, made due obeisance, and presented this petition with all proper humility. Now, these are things that if you're brought up in that environment, you take for granted. That seems to be the natural attitude to God. But imagine someone coming in from a culture where God is not conceived in the image of kingship. How strange he would find this behavior. Who's all this bowing and scraping? Because you know very well that places where they bow and scrape, and where there are thrones, are places of terror. Because anybody who rules by force is and must be basically terrified. That's why he has to have all these protections, why he has to be addressed in the right form of language. Say you go into a court today, an ordinary U.S. law court. There is a very strict etiquette. And if you start laughing, the judge will bang the gavel and threaten contempt of court and all sorts of dire punishments. Because here, everybody has to be serious. It's like on the parade ground. All those Marines lined up, and they salute the flag, and have to have a very grim expression on it. Serious. And so, in the courts of kings, they have to be serious because kings are afraid of laughter. They're also afraid of being attacked suddenly. So everybody has to kneel down. Because if you kneel down or prostrate yourself, you're at a disadvantage. And the king stands or sits at his throne with his bodyguards ranged on either side. See, like that. We've already got the form of a church. The bishop at his throne, his attendant canons and clergy flanking him on either side. And so certain great Catholic cathedrals are called basilica. And basilica, from the Greek, basileus or basilus, is the king. So the basilica is the court of the king. The very titles of God in the Bible, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, are of course borrowed from the Persian emperors. The Cyrus, which is the Greek word, Kyrios, meaning Lord. So the Mass begins with the invocation, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy upon us. The titles are borrowed from the Persian emperor. And so the rites that have become associated with Christian religion are reflections of the great autocratic monarchs of the ancient Near East, the Cyruses of Persia, the Pharaohs of Egypt, and people like Hammurabi, Chaldean monarchs. The universe was conceived then as being ruled on a political pattern. Like that, so that Hammurabi in particular, and Moses after him, they were the wise ones who laid down the rules. They were the patriarchs who said, now this is the way everybody's got to behave. Since you can't all agree among yourselves as to what the rules are going to be, I'm going to tell you what to do. And since I'm the toughest guy around here, I got these brothers of mine who are pretty tough too. We're going to say, this is the law, see? You've got to obey. So, this is how we have got historically the idea of there being a law of nature. That somebody told nature what to do. For example, the wonderful poem by Father Feeney about bees. God, to some sticky stuff not yet alive in a hive, said, come, be my bee and buzz as I did. And sure enough, it was, and it did. See, and in the beginning, let there be light. A command. So commandment is a fundamental idea. So the quest of the law of nature is the quest for the true understanding of the word of God. For by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. What is that word? If we could find out the word of God, here's the idea, you see, we could perform incredible magic. That's why, for example, the name of God in the Bible is not to be uttered except once by the high priest in the Holy of Holies, once a year. Otherwise, that name, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh in Hebrew, we don't really know how it was pronounced. And Jehovah mixes up those consonants with the vowels of Adonai. And that's all mixed up in translation. But anyway, Jehovah is a polite way of saying what can't be said. Because if you know the word, if you know the name of God, you have power. You have the power of God. And so all ancient ideas of magic were based on knowing the names of God. It is said that there are 100 names of God, and 99 are revealed to us. And the camel knows the 100th name, which is why he looks so sturdy. But so also, the person in what we now call primitive orders of society are loath to reveal their names. Because if I know your true name, I can utter it and have power over you. Now, you say, well, that seems a very naive idea, but it is exactly through the knowledge of names that we have Western science. That is magic. That is through trying to understand the laws of nature. So that if you could understand the word, underneath all the phenomena, you could change the phenomena and create magic. Only this, that many scientists have got rather sophisticated and have realized the word comes later than the event. That in the beginning wasn't the word. Of course, if you want to make new sense out of the phrase at the beginning was the word, you have to go to Hinduism, where they have the idea that Vak, V-A-C in Sanskrit, or speech, is the basis of creation. But by this, they fundamentally mean vibration. As sound, you see, is I say that is, you see, if you listen to sound and go right down into it, fundamentally get what sound is all about, you understand the whole mystery of things. Because the whole mystery of things is vibrating energy. On and off. Simple as that. Life and death. Life is on, death is off. Have on, have on, have on, have off. It's quite a relief. But there they say that's the beginning. Now, they also say, in another sense, on another level, that the roots of Sanskrit, say the root form, say the word Buddha, comes from the root form Buddha, which means to know or to be awake. Bhava, which means becoming, comes from the root Bhut, which means to grow. So, karma, doing, comes from the root kri, to act. So they say, though, that the roots of Sanskrit are not simply the roots of the language, they're the roots of life. Because in another sense, altogether, you see, you create the world by the word. And this is something that we're not very conscious of. It's the way you think that determines your basic reactions to what happens. In the words of Shakespeare, there is nothing either good or ill, but thinking makes it so. Thinking is talking to yourself inside your head. And we, through this, build up all sorts of weird notions. We say, for example, well, one day you'll have to die. what's the emotional content of saying you have to die? It means it's going to be something imposed upon you against your will. So it's put in this passive mode, have to. You'll be compelled to die. But I can't be compelled to die unless I'm fighting it. Supposing I want to die, supposing I commit suicide, or supposing we look at it all in another way and say when I get a disease and I as a result of it, getting a disease is something I do, just as much as taking a walk. Only we've got our thoughts arranged so that we say you ought not to get a disease, even if it's just plain old age. Somehow you ought not to do that. You ought to go on. You can't say when death comes about, I laid me down with a will. Because we've got this hang-up about life being divided into two parts. Things that we do, on the one hand, and things that happen to us on the other. And Buddhists say, what happens to you is your karma. And people don't readily understand that. They think my karma, something awful happened to me because of something bad I did in my last life. And therefore, I've got bad karma. Karma simply means you're doing. Your action. So that when something that happens to me is called my karma, it means that it's your own doing. And if you recognize that it's your own doing, it's never bad karma. It's only bad karma. If you refuse to admit that it's your own doing and merely blame someone or something else, that it's something that happened to you. Now I've digressed a little because what I was getting at was the meaning of a law of nature. The laws of nature. The word taken over, the idea of the law of nature was taken over by Western science from this ancient magical notion of the word of God, the commandment of God being the foundation for everything that happens in the world. But now, today, in Western 20th century science, there is an entirely new idea of the law of nature. The laws of nature are not things that exist in any real sense, which, like the motion of stars or the behavior of animals, rocks, they're not phenomena which these things obey. The universe is doing its stuff. But because we have a certain kind of structure and brain, we want to make sense of it. And therefore, we find various ways of understanding the world by the principle of regularity. Now what's that? Let's take a clock. A clock ticks regularly. But the world does not tick regularly. Inconveniently enough, the sun does not have the earth go round it in a neat 360 days. Irritated calendar makers. How to make a rational calendar? There is no solution. Because the rotations of the earth on its own axis do not neatly synchronize with its rotation around the sun. There's always something a little odd about it. So what we do is we superimpose over this rather odd elliptical path the ideal figure of a circle with its 360 degrees. Now that is also like putting a ruler along a piece of wood and saying this piece of wood can be cut to 12 inches. Now there are no inches in the wood. Inches are a method, a technique that human beings have invented for measuring things. And so we can cut out a piece of cloth or a trunk of a tree so many feet. Well, originally, it's simply comparing the trunk with us by putting our feet over it one after another, saying it's so many feet long, or so many spans when you stretch out the hand. This is the fundamental idea of measurement, and the inch is, of course, one joint. Not your height. And so, this comparison of man's body, and its regular shape, you see 10 fingers on either side, 5 fingers on either side makes 10, 5 toes on either side makes 10. And so by stretching ourselves out, as it were, against nature, we measured it. And the idea of this, of measurement, is the same idea as the idea of the law of nature. A law of nature is exactly the same kind of thing as a ruler, or a hammer, or a saw. It is a way of thinking which allows us to control our environment. By observing regularities, and then by making a calculus, which which is a process really of betting. Will it be regular next time? And the odds are that it may be. If it's done it once this way, it's likely to do it again that way. So in this way, you predict eclipses of the sun. You predict the phases of the moon. You measure, you count it, how it went, how often it did it like this, how often it did it like that. And you say, well, it keeps on doing it. And you think, well, it's fascinating. It seems to obey me, because now I can tell you any time it's going to come up. And if the other people around haven't figured it out, they think I'm nagging, because I'm going to say to them, the moon is going to change at such and such a time, so many days from now it's going to have a different shape. They'll say, my God, he was right. And they'll think I'm making it happen. Because I can do that. And so I get a rather privileged position. Because I could predict. But that's the idea, you see, of the law of nature. The law of nature is a human network. They're like the lines of celestial latitude and longitude. They don't exist in the heavens. But we project them on the sky in order to measure the positions of the stars. Because the stars are scattered in a very confusing way. And just try and remember that mess and figure it out. But the clever ones, you see, just said, look at it through a network, a spherical network. You can number all the squares of the spherical network in accordance with the principles of the circle of 360 degrees. You throw the network on the sky. It's really there, you see. Then to help you a little further, pick out some of the big stars and see if they make a shape. You know, this is like doing a Rorschach test. And you see, oh, look, there's one over there that looks like a dipper. Or some people call it a plow. And there's one there that looks like a cross. There's one there that, by some extreme wanking, can be made to look like a virgin. And all these lines that have joined the constellations together are our ways of projecting a pattern upon this great and glorious confusion, so that we can remember it and chart it. But obviously, you can very well see that if you looked at the same pattern of stars from some completely different position in space, all those constellations and their arrangements would vanish. You'd have to invent a new one. Because there is nowhere where the stars really are. It depends where you're looking from. So in this sense then, man in nature with his extraordinary symmetrical brain and its amazing complications figures it out. And it's man who introduces the law into the world. He invents it. But in a way, invenire, to invent, is to discover. But what we discover, in a way, is not something that's out there. We invent the laws of nature. We are discovering something about ourselves and our own passion for prediction, for regularity, for keeping things under control. Therefore, there has to be a law. So then, going back right now to the beginning, what I started saying, the question was then, what is the law of relationship between the atoms? Between the fundamental billiard balls of which the world is composed? Well, you watch the game of billiards, and there's a cue, and it hits that ball, and then it moves over, and it hits that one, and then that hits that one, and then that hits that one. And so the final ball, which moves into the pocket, has its behavior explained through its contact with the other billiard balls and the final contact with the cue. That's why it did it. And so this view of the world as something that happens by the mechanical processes of the law of cause and effect is one that is really basic to most people's common sense today, to most educated people. They would say it's very difficult to figure it all out because the whole thing is so complicated. But if you could know all the details involved in, say, the behavior or a single act of a human being, you would find that it was the ineluctable result of a series of bouncing balls against each other, fundamental atoms that predispose the great final event to be just like that. So that theory of the relationship between the atoms is called, in technical language, catenary. C-A-T-E-N-A-R-Y, catenary. A catenary effect, or a relationship between events, is like, for example, to use another illustration, where you stand a row of bricks up, end up, no? And you knock over the first one, they all go cat, and fall down. That is a catenary sequence. But it becomes increasingly obvious today to the physicist and to the biologist that that will not do as a sufficient description how various events affect each other. And so there's another type of causal relationship altogether. It's called instead of catenary, reticulate. R-E-T-I-C-U-L-A-T-E, reticulate, from the Latin rete, meaning a net relationship. Wherein, in other words, any given event is not simply ascribed to one or more previous events, but that the relationship between the past and the present, and between the present and the future, is all to be taken into consideration in understanding any one event. In other words, let's take one event. I drop a ball and it bounces. Let's say it's an event. I don't know how many events it really is, but we'll just say for the sake of argument that it's an event. Now, is it enough in describing this event to say, I let the ball go, it obeyed the law of gravity, it hit the floor, but because it was made of rubber and had some air inside it, it bounced, and sort of slightly disobeyed gravity because it had an energy in it. But that's not enough. Because that the ball dropped, that I let it go, that it bounced, depended not merely upon a historical sequence of events that you could lay out in a string along a line of time. It depends also upon a present context. There must be a certain density of air. All kinds of things have to coexist with this in order for me to be there to drop the ball at all, much less manufacture a ball. So that what happens must be considered not merely as a historical phenomenon, but it must be seen in context. Context is terribly important because it isn't just when anything happens that is important. It's where it happens. In what setting. So that you could say that my blood in my veins is in a certain setting. In a test tube, it's in a completely different setting. And in a test tube, my blood is not behaving in the way it behaves in my veins. Therefore, it's not the same thing. Say that we human beings are intelligent. Now, if that is so, then the environment in which we live must also be intelligent. Because we are symptoms of that environment, and I don't for the life of me see how you could have intelligent symptoms of an unintelligent organization. We belong in this world. We didn't arrive here from somewhere else. We're not tourists in the universe. We're expressions of it. Like branches express the tree, or fruit express the tree. And so you will not find an intelligent organism living in an unintelligent environment. That is to say, the environment in which you live will be a system of mutual cooperation between a vast complexity of different kinds of organisms. And the total balance of that makes your life possible. In other words, human life goes with, as front goes with back, an extremely complex bacteriological world, which sometimes diseases us, but most of the time assists us by its colors, its societies, its methods of reproduction. All these complex interrelations are the which, without which not, the sine qua non being blood and veins and bones and intestines and all that kind of thing. That's only the bacteriological world. In addition to that, there's a world of insects, which is tremendously important to us. But the insects are extremely clever. And if you talk to a good entomologist, he will scare the wits out of you, because he will show you the most conclusive reasons why insects should ultimately take the whole planet over. Fortunately, we are not absolutely abominated by flies, because we have lots of spiders. And we have birds. And so birds and insects are mutually necessary to each other. And especially flowers and insects have an arrangement with each other whereby one could say of flowers and bees that although they look very different, they are one and the same organism. Flowers, perfume and color. Bees buzz and fly around. But you can't have the flowers without the bees, and you can't have the bees without the flowers. And so you can think through relationships between every conceivable kind of organism, into which you must add things like atmosphere qualities, gas content of atmosphere, on and on and on, until you suddenly realize that what you call your mind and intelligence and your very brain and body is utterly involved with this network of other kinds of organisms, existing at a special temperature in certain gases, which could only be found in certain kinds of solar systems. Now then, seeing that, you should give every technologist a pause. Because you can't go running into that situation with penicillin and DDT unless you know very well when to stop. Unless you can be very discriminating, just what surplus of insects you want to get rid of without killing the other ones that are important. How to give penicillin without destroying all the stomach flora and having to build them up again? That's the doctorless stuff. So this is why in the Taoist Chinese view of nature and the relation of nature to human politics, they set as fundamental the principle called Wu Wei. Wu Wei. Which means non-interference. Not quite what we mean by laissez-faire, but rather close to it. That is to say, when you act upon nature, and you can't help but interfere, there's no way of isolating yourself from the world. Every time you breathe, you interfere with something. See? But the art of Wu Wei is that when you interfere, endeavor to do so by going with the grain of things. In other words, if you want to split wood, split it with the grain. Don't try to split it across the grain. And like you want to pick a fight, don't use violence, but use the other person's violence to bring about his downfall. That's judo. And that judo is applied Wu Wei. Sailing is Wu Wei. As distinct from rowing. So then, the Taoists, you see, recognized that there is this universal organism. And they thought of the cosmos as a great organism without a boss. There is no one in Chinese philosophy making the world happen or ordering. There is no, as it were, central principle in the middle which sends out commands to all the subordinate parts. But rather, that thing organizes itself. Their word for nature means Zunan, meaning what is so of itself. So they saw the whole cosmos as a self-regulating organism. And they further saw that the individual is not merely a part of that organism. He is an expression of the whole thing. And the whole depends upon this expression, just as much as the expression depends upon it. And that was the principle of mutual interpenetration, which is called in, it's more familiarly known by its Japanese name, Jijimuge. The principle of the network. Between thing event and thing event, there is no obstruction. But you see, it remains to us a bit of a puzzle to say that all this is an intelligence, because we can think of all kinds of objections to it. We can think, if by some conscious science we were able to construct the universe, we would do it a little differently. We would have improvements to suggest upon mosquitoes. We would, perhaps a great surgeon might suggest that the human body organizes a little differently. We can think of dozens of things. But you find the curious thing is this. When you try to think out carefully how to improve the world, and then you realize that what the consequences of your suggestion would be, you wouldn't like all of the consequences. Hence to say, be careful of what you desire. You may get it. And then one invites the individual, and this is one of the great things to suggest another kind of universe. What kind of universe would you design if you were God? And I recommend, I'm not going to go into this because it's a long story, but I thoroughly recommend it as an exercise in thought. Model your own and see what comes out of it. Because I can only tell you that you will eventually discover that you will model this one. And you'll find out, you see, that it's based on certain absolutely fundamental principles. which of course includes the game of hide and seek. Now you see it, now you don't, which is vibration, which is the same thing as energy. You've got to begin with that. With that, once you start with that, it implies the rest. Because all that we see around us is just a fantastic combination of black and white elements, of what the Chinese call the yin and the yang, the negative and positive forces. And it all leads to this, but in an incredible dance. So then, you have difficulty, though, of course, in seeing the world as an organism. Because when you look out at the stars, you are in roughly the same situation or relationship to what you are seeing as when a physicist studies the constitution of the atom. He will make a map of the behavior of the nucleus in which there will be various rotating particles or wavicles. And you will see something which looks like a mathematical design and doesn't look like an organism. Because we expect an organism to be a kind of gooey thing with blood, flesh, wriggles, and so on. So if you looked only through the microscope, you wouldn't see the organism. But when we look out at the rest of the universe, we are, as it were, sitting down on one of those electrons, looking through a microscope at the rest of it. And therefore we don't see the sort of total design it makes up. That's much too far away from our consciousness state. And this is one of the reasons then why it's difficult for us to formulate the idea that there is an intelligence operating here. Because all we see is a firework display. This tremendous display of radioactive mud and gas. And one would say, well, it's just a kind of a contraption that happened to arrive there, and that's all there is to it. But the funny thing about man is that he can put himself down and say that he is an accident, a kind of colloidal chemical accident that occurred on this very unimportant rock, rotating around a lesser star on the fringe of one of the minor galaxies. And that this is where we are, and that the universe does not give a damn about it. Yet the odd thing is that this wretched little chemical thing can reflect an image of the whole cosmos in its vastness inside it, and can know it's there. And that means, though, that this thing, however small in dimensions, is vast in comprehension. And what scale are you going to attach the word importance to? Mere size or degree of comprehension? By degree of comprehension, man is huge. By that scale. So then, if the principle is simple, that if we could see from a perfectly physical point of view, what we would call a strictly scientific point of view, that the individual organism goes with its environment in just the same way as bees go with flowers. And flowers in their turn go with grubs. And grubs in their turn go with birds. And so on, all the way through. Then, when you want to define yourself, you cannot say that I am just what is inside the skin. Because what is inside the skin goes with everything outside and constitutes a single, complex field of diversified behaviors, diversified processes. You look at that then from a strictly physical point of view, and there it is, this network. But then the trouble comes up. You say when you studied that, you read all the books on ecology and botany, zoology, astronomy, and so on. You say, yes, I see that. That's quite true, theoretically. But I would like to be able to feel that this is so, as mystics report that they have felt it. To have that kind of experience in which the network is absolutely clear. Because you see, if we don't take it that far, if we know about it theoretically only, the theoretical knowledge is not going to have much effect on what we do. But knowledge of a more emotionally compelling nature will indeed affect the way we act with respect to our environment, and may, in fact, prevent us from destroying our environment, as we are now very busy Congress of the United States recently passed an act making it a very serious offense to burn the American flag. And they passed this act with many patriotic speeches and rhetoric and much reciting of poems. So this is the most fantastic example of American confusion between symbol and reality, between mainstream and real. Because this same Congress is directly or indirectly responsible for burning up what the flag stands for, namely the geographical United States and its people. By not really doing much about devastation of our forests, the pollution of our water and atmosphere, the reckless waste of our natural resources, and resorting to a form of economy, which under any the same circumstances would be termed sheer lunacy. Obviously, they cannot distinguish between the symbol and the reality because we are hypnotized with words and symbols. And so, when the flag is more precious than the country, we are insane. When you say, I love my country, and what you mean by that is you feel certain emotions when you salute a flag, you don't love your country at all.